What is up, everybody? Mr. Purtis here. Welcome to Unit 5, Part 3A. This is on what we call reform and reaction. Two different empires, two different places that we're going to focus on here, which is in China, which is the Qing dynasty, which is a connection to the last time period, as well as the Ottoman Empire, which is also a connection to the last time period. As we go through this, please take notes. Hugely important piece on this. This is one of two parts that we'll do on two other empires, which is Japan, as well as Russia, who are going through something similar. So here's kind of the basic theme to set all this up. The Europeans, especially in Western Europe, are going through the Industrial Revolution. Other places around the world kind of see this happening and either by choice or by necessity decide that they need to start industrializing too. So this is kind of the story of how each country progresses through this and whether or not they are successful. So here's a little background on China for review. The Ming Dynasty, which was in power in 1450, so we're going back a time period. This is all synthesis right here, 1450 to 1750, synthesis. The Ming Dynasty had been overthrown, and they were overthrown in 1644. There was if you don't remember, there was a lot of silver that came in. It led to inflation. There were problems. Warlords stepped up. So a group from Manchuria up here called the Qing, who are going to call themselves the Qing, they're called Manchus, invade down into China. This is the second time China has been successfully overthrown by foreign invaders. The other time was the Mongols. And the Qing come down into and overthrow the Ming Dynasty. They do learn from the mistakes of the Mongols. They keep Confucian scholars in place. They bring the civil service exam back. They make it stricter to legitimize and assert their authority, and as well as to legitimize their power. One thing that I don't remember if we talked about last that I just think is kind of interesting, there is in Manchu culture, and again, Manchus are not Chinese. They wear these long ponytails. They shave the top of their head right here, and then they wear these long ponytails with a braid. One thing they did do and they forced the Chinese to wear these queues, which was a way to kind of assert their authority over the Chinese. So this is a Manchu culture, but they're making the Chinese do it. So a lot of pictures that you see from the 1800s and early 1900s in China, men are wearing these queues, as they're called. Anyway, that sets up in the 1750s. So we have this government that is using Chinese dynastic cycle. And here's kind of the problems that we run into by the 1800s. So again, this time period is 1750 to 1900. The 1450 to 1750 is just going back a little bit. There is a drug that is entering China, and it is called opium. Opium is a drug that is highly addictive. It's the kind of drug that if someone does one time, they can be addicted for their life. It comes from a plant called the poppy plant, which is mainly found in South Asia, so in India, what would be considered today modern-day Afghanistan, Pakistan. It is a drug that someone in the 1800s would smoke. It would generally make them kind of out of it and then fall asleep for an extended period of time. They would wake up and want to smoke opium again. In China, many Chinese found a taste, as they would call it, for opium. And opium is coming from India. It's being sold from India to China by British merchants, if you can follow that. From India to China by British merchants. Down here in this chart, it shows you the number of opium imports into China between 1650 and 1880. And if you check this out, this is a chest, which would be 140 pounds of opium, which is a lot of opium. We're going from, in 1800, 200 chests to 6,500 chests, which shows you a lot of people in India are smoking opium. Here's the problem. Opium doesn't make you productive. Opium basically makes you lay down and do nothing. So you have mainly husbands, but also wives who are going to smoke opium and then not being a productive member of Chinese society. Most of them are middle to upper class people. Poor people don't have money to buy opium. Therefore, the people who we're talking about who are smoking opium are government workers. So we have Confucian scholars, people in the government, people who are business owners who are not doing their job. If you are China and opium is being smoked in your country and you're the government, what do? You ban it. And so China is going to ban opium. Here's the problem. The British are making a ton of money off opium sales. So the British, in order to stop China from banning it, declare a war on China. So the British and the French together are going to fight in what are pretty much two opium wars, but we'll just combine them for here. And they fight two wars against the Chinese, called the Opium Wars. Here's the deal. Britain and France just want to sell opium. China doesn't want opium sold. The British and the French are industrialized. They have better weapons. They have better technology. They just have superior access to materials and goods that China doesn't, and they easily defeat China. China gets beaten back pretty easily. This is a huge deal in the course of history because if you think about it, up to this point, Through everything we've talked about, China has been the center of the trade world. Everyone wants access to China, and China, for the first time in their history, is really going to get destroyed. And for the first time, they're going to be open up to Europeans. So the Europeans win. They make the Chinese sign what is called the Treaty of Nanking. It's called Nanking because that is a city in China. And as a result of this, China is forced to open up to Europeans, totally opened up. Europeans are going to flood into the country. And remember, if you go back a time period and go back in history, Europeans who came to China were generally isolated into small sections of the city and were not allowed to leave to go anywhere else. Also, the city of Hong Kong down here is going to be given to Great Britain until 1997. Let me say it again, 1997, almost when you were alive, 1997. And in 1997, Britain does give Hong Kong finally back to China. Also, there's something called extraterritoriality, which means any European who commits a crime in China does not get tried by the court system in China. They get to go back to their home country. So, for example, if someone commits murder, if someone is a thief, if someone does something illegal, they don't get tried in China. They get tried back in Britain or France or Germany by their home country, which is a pretty big deal because you can imagine how the British court system is going to treat a Briton or a British person who committed a crime in China pretty lightly. So that's the Treaty of Nanking. Here is the one other issue. With all of these Europeans coming in, there is a rebellion that starts. There's a guy, and this is a long story, but I'm going to keep this really short, named Han Shiquan, who is a failed Confucian scholar. He tried to take the Confucian exam multiple times. He fails multiple times. He's a disappointment to his family. He eventually has a dream that he believes that he is God's Chinese son, that his brother is Jesus, and that he was sent on this earth to create God's Chinese kingdom. So, sounds kind of crazy, and who would buy into this? But he gains a ton of followers, and he starts leading a rebellion against the Qing Empire. As a result of this, he fights against the Qing, and there's other rebellions going on, and approximately 20 to 30 million people are going to die during this. And one of the issues that's really happening in China and why people are buying into this, it's not just they believe that this guy, this random failed Confucian scholar, is God's Chinese son, but really China, if you look down here, is going through a population explosion between pretty much, if you look at here, 1749 into 1851. So over the course of 100 years, our population in China is going from 177 million to 430 million. That is an insane number. And the problem is that you have all these extra people, almost, I don't know, my math isn't the best, but 260 million people, more people. You need to feed those people. And China is not industrialized. So since China is not industrialized, they can't feed those people. Hungry people are angry people willing to join this rebellion. Eventually, the Taiping Rebellion and Hong's Rebellion is put down. Westerners come in and help stop it. And they help the Qing stop it. But it really shows the weakness of the Qing. And when 20 to 30 million people die, that's not good. So you have all kinds of issues. So there needs to be a reform. And in China, they're going to reform their country. And there's a movement led by the Qing government called the Self-Strengthening Movement. The goal is to modernize the military. And the Chinese government's going to help fund this process to modernize their military. The motto is Chinese learning at the base, Western learning for use. So essentially what that means is the Chinese are going to really stick to their Confucian values, but bring in some Western ideas to help them improve. Here's the issue that they're going to have. China needs natural resources, and they need Western learning to fully industrialize. It's not going to be successful. They try and really keep a balance between Western ideas and Chinese ideas, and a lot of times they don't gel together, and a lot of the Confucian scholars are going to be resistant to Western ideas because there's a lot of ethnocentrism in China. So here's what's going to happen. We have all these Westerners flooding into the country, whether it's through the Treaty of Nanking or coming in to help Westernize and industrialize, and there's going to be a reaction to this. So, problem in China, they're not industrialized, they lose a war, Westerners come in. The reaction or the reform that they're going to create is the self-strengthening movement. So we have more Westerners coming in trying to change the system in China. And as a result of this, there's going to be a rebellion called the Boxer Rebellion. And the group who is part of this Boxer Rebellion are essentially martial artists in China who are believed to have this mystical or magical power. And they try and lead an anti-colonial, what we would call nationalist movement, trying to kick out the the Westerners. So their goal is to go around throughout China, whether it's sneak up through sneak attacks or essentially to try and rid China of all Westerners. This movement is unsuccessful. The Chinese try and kick out the Westerners. The Westerners send in soldiers, and you can see a lot of different soldiers here who are coming in to China to try and stop this rebellion, and they are successful. The Westerners, who this Boxer Rebellion was sponsored by and encouraged by the emperor. And as a result of the Boxers losing, it really undermines the legitimacy and the authority of the Qing government. And by 1900, the Qing government is on the verge of collapsing, which is going to be what we're going to see in the next time period. One other place for this unit, for this piece right here, is the Ottoman Empire. From 1450 to 1750, just a reminder, this is the Ottoman Empire. They have been expanding. They're basically on 3 separate continents. They did use this group of people called the Janissaries. They are the elite soldiers originally when it was first created in 1450. They're Christian boys who were taken from their parents and forced to serve in this elite military squad. So, here's the deal with the Ottoman Empire in the 1800s. Similar thing. One, they are losing land. There are nationalist movements going on, and these nationalist movements are forcing people who are not Ottoman Turks to separate from the Ottoman Turkish Empire. So we have this area up here, the Balkans. People are going to start separating. Also, we're losing land from war. The Ottoman Empire is finding themselves shrinking, which is not good. The second thing is they are losing money. Merchants who had traditionally at the start of 1450 in the previous time period gone into the Mediterranean to trade are now going around Africa. This is not good if you're the Ottoman Empire, because the tax base that you had there, you're losing that money. So they're not industrialized, they're losing lands, they're not getting money from trade, there's all these problems, so you need to create some kind of reform. Just like what we saw in China, there's going to be a reform called the Tanzimat reforms. This is from 1839 to 1879, very similar to the self-strengthening movement. The goal is to westernize. It's a little different, though, than the self-strengthening movement, in that the Tanzimat reforms are really going to kind of transform or attempt to transform Ottoman society. So we're going to change the law. We're going to have it based on Enlightenment ideas. It's going to be based on French laws, where people are treated equally under the law. We're going to have education. Instead of all schools being religiously based on Islam, we're going to make non-religious schools. And we're going to encourage people in the Ottoman Empire to go to Europe to get educated and to bring back this education and these ideas into the Ottoman Empire. Also, we're going to have the military, that we're going to use it based on German ideas. It's going to be mandatory conscription, so everyone's going to have to join. We're going to use military tactics from the Germans. We're going to bring in Germans to teach us how their military works, to improve our technology. So we have these 3 things. So we're trying to westernize. We're trying to improve our military. We're trying to industrialize. But there's a problem with this. We have 2 sides that eventually develop. And by 1879, we have this old school group, these religious officials, the Sultan, who don't like the reforms. They don't like that generally Westerners are coming in and changing the Ottoman Turkish society. So in 1879, all of these reforms to westernize, which have been working out relatively well, are canceled by the Sultan. And this is the Sultan Abul Hamid II. He cancels all the reforms. There is also, here's the problem, for 40 years you've been reforming society. You have people who have grown up only knowing these reforms, and then you cancel them. And these young people who have been living under these reforms, who might now be 30, 40 years old, and all they knew was these reforms, you suddenly stop them. These are Western educated Turkish people who've gone to Europe, who've seen the benefits of industrialization, who've seen the benefits of Western society and Western law, and they are angry about this. And so what we're going to have is this old school group, religious officials and Sultan, anti-reform, and then we have this new school group called the Young Turks. Remember, this is the Turkish society in the Ottoman Empire who want to keep this. Here's what's going to happen in the next time period. Again, a little synthesis. This group versus this group are going to kind of battle for power, and not to give it away, don't tell anybody, but this group right here is going to end up taking control. So that's what we got. That's this quick summary. I got another part in the next video, but that's what we got here. Any questions, as always, write it down. Thanks.